Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Alcor is pleased to welcome you all to today's webinar. Alcor is a global cloud advisory and implementation services company serving Fortune 500, government agencies, and other leading organizations in multiple industry verticals across the Americas, Canada, and India. Alcor is also a Servicenow Gold Services and Gold Sales partner. We partner with leading technology companies, including AWS, FireEye, Microsoft, Okta, Incorda, and 3C Logic. We advise leading businesses on cloud platforms, architecture, enterprise service management, and integrating IT service delivery. We also provide business process consulting to capture, re-engineer, and improve processes that can easily be automated to deliver real value. The Alcor consulting team has excellence in business strategy, cloud technology, and organizational change management. Our ongoing webinar series is designed to inform, enlighten, and start discussions within your own organizations. If you require any additional information after listening to today's webinar, please reach out to us through our website, www.alcortech.com. We have time reserved at the end of the webinar for Q&A, so please feel free to type any questions into the questions section of the webinar dashboard. Today's webinar topic is User Enablement and Adoption, Key Drivers to Value Realization of ServiceNow, presented by Amit Singh. Amit is CEO of Alcor Solutions and has helped numerous Fortune 500 clients and governments build effective IT strategies, led large transformational IT projects, and established best practices-based IT governance. He possesses a deep understanding of cloud computing and its enormous value for enterprise IT. Amit has more than 21 years of management and consulting experience with leading consulting companies such as PricewaterhouseCoopers and Gartner. I'll now turn the webinar over to Amit.
Thank you, Jeff. And while you were talking, I thumbed through a couple of slides which showed who Alcor is. And so we'll dive right into the meat of the webinar today, value realization. And really, not just ServiceNow, but any platform, any modern day cloud technology platform that needs constant care, constant feeding, and continuous adoption. As we are talking to a number of customers, the conversation seems to have changed quite a bit in the last year or so. From a conversation point earlier of, hey, we are replacing our systems. We want to move to the cloud. We want to use software as service, infrastructure as service. We want to replace our legacy applications. That was the conversation point a year or so ago. In last 1 year, perhaps last 2 years, a lot of people have moved to software service platforms like ServiceNow, grew on them, grew on platforms like Salesforce, Ariba, and others. Along with that, also on the cloud enablement side with AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, a lot of movement in that. And that conversation today has changed to, hey, we moved to these new platforms, or we are in the process of moving. And we are realizing that we need to take some steps to make sure that we get an optimal ROI on these investments. A lot of that has to do with adoption. A lot of that has to do with enablement, which essentially is, people using the software comfortably to its fullest functionality, right? And not falling back onto earlier habits of whatever process and tools that they were used to working with. This is a substantial conversation these days because And organizations are sinking in a lot of money, a lot of capital into purchasing these new platforms, integrating them, and starting to use them. And many times we are seeing that large investments are still not yielding the return that that was expected, primarily because people have either been shy of using it, not really using it to its complete functionality, not integrating it, not growing with platforms, and such. And so it's really becoming a question in front of technology vendors, partners like us, as well as clients. And I've been asked to deliver this webinar to multiple CIOs now and their teams on how to gain this adoption, how to really have people adopt it, use it, improve on it, and such. And so that's what I would talk about in the next few minutes here. The agenda that I have set is, let's set the stage of why do a lot of technology initiatives, even though they're well implemented, fail to take off or fail to find complete value realization. Let's discuss some of the key causes of adoption. And then we will spend some time talking about a value realization lifecycle framework that we have built. It's not rocket science, honestly. But at the end of the day, there are multiple frameworks that have been provided by consulting organizations, by research institutes, by universities. A lot of studies have been done on the subject, and we will talk through some data as well as a recommended framework that we use in our own engagements now. We will talk about some of the benefits of that, metrics that people should use if they want to measure adoption, and also, what is the business value realization and how to measure that too. So that's really what I intend to walk through in the next several minutes here. So to set the stage, let's recognize that if we look at an organization's work fabric today, it consists of a lot of these activities surrounding their shared core values. Why is the organization in existence? And they have a strategy. They usually have strategy gives rise to structure to support that business strategy and its outcomes. The structures have processes, people to support them, skills obviously, and then finally systems to enable people to do their job, complete the processes, provide reporting to support the structure, and then support the business strategy. That's typically how an organizational work fabric model works. However, if you look at it, in the modern day organization, the last 10, 15 years or so, there's an enormous degree of interdependencies that have been woven into this fabric. Systems today aren't just at the receiving end of, hey, we will design a system based on our people, our skills, our processes, our structure. They actually many times are defining the kind of people, skills, process, and structure you need. Organizations such as Uber, Lyft, one would argue Apple, Google, they have really created complete new strategies, complete new set of industries. And even in brick and mortar or other technology organizations, the amount of technology that is being used today doesn't just impact people and processes, it impacts a very structure and strategy. So it's really important to realize that when you adopt a new technology that touches multiple people, multiple departments, it often leads to much more widespread change than people imagine it would. That's, let's take a pause here and sort of internalize that. The amount of change is enormous. And at the same time, for any new technology to be adopted, it has to be widely understood, embraced, and supported. And it has to do all three of those in a time of significant change. Thus, if you look at it, It makes IT initiatives hard. Why? IT is a complicated business, and if you look at it, if you look at how many departments, how many areas IT supports today, and this this graphic doesn't even cover application management. It's mostly about just IT operations, infrastructure supporting business. Look at the amount of interchanges. Look at the amount of systems and processes something like this needs, right? And when you do a new implementation of any technology, any cloud technology, any platform technology, one realizes after going through them for a few, Alcor has gone through more than 500 implementations now. These implementations are always based on imperfect knowledge. You never know exactly what you're getting into, and the client usually doesn't know everything that they need to. Hindsight is the only thing that is 20/20, right? But going into it, you are working with imperfect knowledge. And finally, the business doesn't really stop while you're implementing these large initiatives. So you're always changing these wheels in a moving bus, or changing turbines in a flying plane, or what have you. Combine these three: complicated business, a lot of change that we talked about in the last slide, new implementations based on imperfect knowledge, and business just continuing to move at its own pace. Put all of them together, you realize that many initiatives do fail to find adoption. They fail for one reason or the other. There's a whole host of examples of those. People have been used to doing things in a certain way, and something new comes in and they're not comfortable. They at times don't trust the data reports. They may believe it's got partial functionality, and they continue using older methods. If someone has been doing something for a year or 2 years, you develop a level of comfort with it, and obviously there is a resistance to change. And at the same time, there are other things like you disagree on change processes. It may impact different people in the organization differently. It may alter the power structure, the politics of the organization, the fabric of the organization, and people react differently to it. Right? There's often interdepartmental friction on a lot of implementations that we see. People also use it for a given part, and then they say, I'm not growing with this platform. Why? Because it fell from favor, or it's not sort of the dish of the day, if you will. That happens a lot. People invest in lots and lots of tools, and lots of times they really don't think enough about why are they buying all this? Why are they investing so much more instead of focusing on getting the value of investment, to those already made, and get that value out. There's often confusions. There's often parallel functionalities. We thought cloud will solve it all. Cloud has made it worse. So, so put all of those together, you realize that IT initiatives, anytime you do a large IT engagement, it is not an easy task to manage the change that it brings about. So as adoption becomes poor, as users or fulfillers or other departments show unwillingness to come onto a given platform that IT is pushing, or that a set of users or set of stakeholders are pushing, typically the key reasons fall in these two brackets. The first one can be summarized in terms of not being able to manage the organizational change that is accompanied by an implementation. And no implementations are perfect, as we talked about. But not a lot of implementations fail outright also. And you're somewhere in the middle. And when you're somewhere in the middle, the next thing that you have to do is to inch along to get better, right? And that requires the organization to change, to become a participant. And often when that doesn't happen at the scale that is required, there is a mismatch in terms of the organizational pace and the pace of IT, right, that initiative, thus leading to unmanaged change. The second thing, which you've also seen often, is that people, we are all humans. We are intrinsically, habit-driven people. And how we process external stimuli has got something to do with that as well. So I'll spend a few minutes on it later. But essentially, if you look at some of the data, there was a study done by McKinsey. There have been a lot of studies on this. And basically, this one talked about that there was a very close correlation in terms of companies that got the lowest returns on their investments and the kind of change management capabilities that they did. Very, very direct correlation. A lot of failed projects almost invariably had failed OCM or poor change management capabilities and strengths behind them. And the ones that actually had a lot often ended up actually getting much more than what they expected in terms of returns. So these would be the key reasons, and then there's a clear establishment by multiple studies of the linkage between adoption and organizational change management. But the funny thing is, a lot of engagements that we have done, and when we talk to clients about, hey, you need to make sure this is adopted, it often comes across as, well, what should we do to do adoption? Maybe we need to communicate a lot. We need to make sure we over-communicate. We tell everybody in the core team and the extended team and all the stakeholders and all the departments. Make sure everything is shared openly and transparently. I'm sure a lot of you heard those words, right? And also, let's ensure our people are trained. And if we take care of these things, we communicate a lot, and we make sure our people are trained, guess what? This will be a success. The engagement will be, the implementation will be done nicely. And after that, all the people will be well trained. They already know everything they need to know. And bingo, significant adoption almost immediately. It doesn't really happen that way, as we know. A lot of IT initiatives don't take off or perform to the extent they should. So in reality, it isn't just these two. These two are just oversimplifications of what are the causes of underperformance on OCM. The real reasons are more complex. A lot of you would agree that when engagements are planned, when initiatives and new implementations are planned, the area that gets one of the least focuses is change management. Again, a number of studies, we are quoting an IBM study here and a PwC study here, which talks about the key reasons. It's not invested in. It's not something that is a focus when you start engagements out. It's often thought of as, I'm done with my engagement. Oh my God, I'm running into issues. People are not adopting it. What should I do? It's not really handled proactively. Often there's a lack of confidence because you've done your IT initiatives one way for the last 5 years, and if you've not made OCM as a central pillar of your IT initiatives, your people don't have that faith in your capabilities of doing it the next time. And then lack of skills also, and that is not just technology skills, but really skills to drive adoption through the enterprise of any technology initiative that you're doing. So when we look at all of that, and simply because cloud has been speeding up not only technology purchase, not only technology change, but also this need for faster adoption. Alcor has been getting a number of questions. This is something that we have been talking to our clients in all our large programs. That hey, this problem is not a simple training or communication problem. Lack of adoption, lack of enthusiasm, especially with technologies that get updated or upgraded every 6 months, right, needs to be handled as a multi-dimensional problem and with a holistic solution, with a framework, with a team, with focus. So Alcor has built out again a lifecycle framework. We like to look at it from the word get-go onwards. which has got seven, 8 components in it. It's, you understand your stakeholders, you analyze impact, you communicate strategically, you engage the leadership, you build a change network, build capabilities to actually do that work on the new technology. You leverage trainings, and finally, you constantly adopt, because these platforms are changing regularly, 6 months, 8 months, 1 year. Their release cycles and their patch cycles constantly coming. And without a real lifecycle framework, you again fall back into the old habit, if you will, of, hey, let's train people and let's make sure we communicate a lot, right? So if you look at it, a holistic solution really needs to engage multiple sets of people across the organization, from the core team, from the PMO office, from your executive stakeholders. Each one has a different role to play. There are people that are being impacted in the organization. You got to analyze that impact too, right? You build a network constantly of change agents. You build capabilities, and you're constantly assessing all of that. As I said earlier, it's not rocket science, but it's a very structured approach. And an approach like this is what you require if you want to keep on growing with the platforms that you have, whether it is Servicenow or AWS or a combination in most cases, right, for your technology architecture in which a lot of pieces are changing. The good thing is you don't need an OCM lifecycle separately for each engagement. An organization simply needs to recognize this is a central pillar and start building a program that supports multiple projects, multiple technology initiatives. So I'll talk briefly about each one of those components, and then we will open up for questions. Stakeholders, the graph at the bottom, there's typically 4 kinds of stakeholders in any implementation, based on their interests as well as their power, right? And very often when we look at that stakeholder inference map, we work fairly well about people that we need to manage closely, right? That's, they've got high power, they have high interest, they're usually in there. However, often we do not think of people that are either interested or people who need to keep informed or monitor till something comes out of the left field, and a lot of times we feel that, ouch, didn't think of that one. Leads to rework, leads to really another requirement gathering session or what have you, right? And obviously lessens the trust that people will have in that system. So it's much better to actually identify and understand your stakeholders up front, create a stakeholder map, and understand what is in this initiative for them. How will they be impacted? Why, will they contribute? Do they own it? Do they have, will they be in favor? Will they be against? Right, based on a whole host of things. But it is, today what we have seen as clients do a lot of work identifying people that are impacted. But then a lot of those people are only involved towards the very end, UAT and others. And a stakeholder analysis, a larger stakeholder analysis is what is required to first know people's motivations and what impacts them. The second step, and again, there are templates that go behind it. There's a lot of documentation that goes behind each of these steps. Analyzing impact is something that is pretty detailed and that needs to be pretty detailed. You have to look at what are people looking for from that initiative. How will they be impacted? Will the processes change? Will the reporting changes? Will the organizational structure change? Right? Will the will there be what I would call as inflection points or conflict areas from other initiatives, from other way that they collect information today. That impact has to be analyzed and at least some conclusions reached on how it will be addressed early on. You have to assess that risk and how will you manage it. And use shift left to the extent possible, which is you manage the risk as much as you possibly can, as early as you can in the initiative, or whenever you start your OCM life cycle. Best to document these things, detail them, so if there are transitions in the project teams and such, you are following it as a program approach. These are not just based on individual capabilities or capacity in a project. So you look at your stakeholders, you analyze the impact, and then you communicate strategically. It's important to notice that different communication needs will exist for your different stakeholder groups. And really, you don't want to use a one-size-fits-all approach on your communications. You do plan that, and then you do execute it. This probably is one of the most important points to build trust and confidence in your user group for your initiative. The core messaging of communication plan, this is an example. There are two types of messages that one needs to give. One is functional communications, which are about the overall project status, green, red, yellow, telling the users about changes in processes and procedures that will impact them and such. But then there are change management communications, where there's typically three layers of those communications, or three levels. The first one is around the executive workshops, and this is where you have to look at them as one stakeholder group that obviously impacts the initiative a lot in terms of strategy, direction, support, outcomes, and they have to be sensitized that the change management initiative is really important. There has to be a lot of buy-in from them. Right, and without this communication, you will not be able to succeed in the next step, which is the executive buy-in. The second level of change management communication, again, is with groups that are being impacted quite a bit directly, which are process owners. And this communication isn't functional. It isn't about the project. It's about what will change for you. How will we do work? What reportings do we need in this case? Will this tool, what it gives, are we using a wait and watch approach, or are we starting out with what do I want and then working backwards from it, right? So change communication very often will drive your project strategy, your project plan, significantly, especially in the early on requirements and design stages. And when done right, this is often the difference between a well-executed in budget and time engagement versus something that just spills over. The third level is essentially for other relevant stakeholders. Again, the point is you want to constantly communicate with those folks, but appropriately. You also don't want to bore them with things that don't interest them. And that's why you have third level stakeholder groups, because there you don't want to communicate a lot. You don't want to overburden folks with information, but you want to make sure that you keep them involved. So that's about communication strategy and plan. As you can see, it's a fairly significant task. It needs a lot of time as well. The next step is engaging leadership. And really, sooner you do that, the better your communication plan, your interactions, your engagement, the entire adoption follows from one of these steps. A lot of people say that yes, we absolutely engage the leadership, but I think a lot of you have also seen the difference in initiatives where a leader is truly engaged versus where they are getting reports and they show up once in a while. the progress, the level of direction that is required, the engagement, right? It's a key pillar of change management strategy of an organization. And one of my favorite sayings is, don't pick 50 things, pick 5 at a time, but do them well. And that also goes to what is leadership supporting. And that should become a key pillar in the decision-making process of the key changes that folks are going to make in a given year. They have to look at leadership's capacity, and leaders themselves have to do that and only pick things that they can and see them to a finish. The key points of the leadership engagement plans lead through example, actually demonstrate commitment, facilitate the development and communication of vision. And it should be done regularly. People don't listen to leaders. They follow leaders' behavior and their examples. We all, as humans, do that. So this isn't a talk track or just wordsmithing, right, or lip service. This has to be a real example. This has to be something where leaders are actually very actively engaged. At the same time, an open door policy early on to allow people to voice concerns or make suggestions. So that's number 4. Building a change network. Another key thing, and really not just building a change network, but also recognizing folks that are spending significant time over and above what is required to champion the cause, to really talk about this alternative way of working. How is it better? To answering questions, one-on-one convincing folks. Building and nourishing that change network is essential. Again, because the adoption problem is not a one-time problem in the modern technology space. It happens all the time. So steps, identify and set up the change network. Develop those roles, responsibilities. Get it structured. And engage that change network based on strategy, and then make sure that you're recognizing your change champions, your change agents. When the project succeeds, those change management folks that really weren't going to win or lose significantly, whether it succeeded or failed, but they really went over and above what was required to ensure its success. Right, so that growing that change management group, that change network, is one of the essential components that very often gets overlooked as people go about doing initiatives. The next step, I would argue, obviously one of the most critical steps is building capabilities. And again, goes back to my comment during the leadership slide. Organizations have to really keep on assessing how much change can they imbibe without falling apart. We have seen this in multiple projects. A lot of pressure on timelines, driving consultants to, deliver in as fast a time as possible, but then the engagement or the initiative stalls. And a lot of times it stalls because the organization did not look internally and say, well, how many initiatives do we have? Can we do justice to this? And so, you have to either hire, train, or contract capabilities. You have to assess your workforce capability. There has to be a roadmap of recommendations and, on what those would be. There would be new structures. There would be roles, job descriptions as the way of work changes. So it isn't just, again, hiring people and training them. It is really about making sure the organization, the unit as a whole, is capable of adopting the technology and making it work. There should be a program structure, and this is not just true for Servicenow. It's really true for any large platform that organizations implement. There must be a steering committee. There must be a decision-making body which says yay or nay. There must be one or more product owners that are truly empowered to manage the demand pipeline. What happens with successful platforms, ServiceNow is definitely one of them. A lot of people want to get onto it as quickly as they can. And that becomes a job of a product owner to essentially manage the demand pipeline, also keeping in mind how much change can the organization imbibe without falling apart. And a program manager, we are living in a state of constant flux, constant change. If you look at the Agile framework, these are non-stop releases, non-stop development. So change becomes a way of life, and for any significant program, it needs to be managed like that. And then process owners, which are stakeholders, very much impacted. And these folks have to have a voice, have to have a say on what the platform does. Any conflict, disagreements will need to be managed either at that level or with the product owner or with the platform steering committee. So that covers capability, building in terms of structure and hiring, obviously. The second part of capability building is obviously training. That's the only way to enable folks. And then the fact of the matter is skill sets are in high demand. And so organizations, whether they're consultants like Alcor or end clients, right, or even vendors like ServiceNow or AWS or others, have to keep on training. And so this thing is not just one training class. Very often training seems to stop at I've got certified, I'm good. But training should be a year-round strategy. Organizations should really plan for, if this is a roadmap I'm doing, this is the change I'm going to bring in, what kind of skill sets, what kind of experience do I need to successfully imbibe it, and thus make those changes in terms of their training strategy as well. Assess that impact of training finally. Train and then see, did it help? If it didn't, what else can be done? So it's a closed loop that needs to be repeated. I would argue endlessly, so long as you have that technology. So before we jump into this area, I want to sort of summarize. We talked about a number of things. We talked about stakeholder analysis, about change impact analysis, communication, key stakeholders. We talked about building and nourishing a change network, and then capability building, training folks, right? We do all of those, and you would see those are all part of that organizational change management plan in an organization. That is required to constantly invest in its people and its structure, and that's needed to really get the most out of your investments in any given technology. As we talked earlier, that is really what is a holistic framework to support multiple dimensions of this problem called lower adoption or poor adoption. And you have to really customize it based on your own needs. In some places it could be very small. In others it can be a very significant program. Depends on the size, scope, complexity of the change that you're bringing out. But then I wanted to spend a little bit of time about habits, and this is something which is discussed a lot in social sciences, but in engineering world this is not something that has been addressed a whole lot, and I thought I would include this in the conversation. At least a realization that after doing all those organizational things, at times we would still find ourselves falling back onto our old habits. I am myself guilty of that. Alcor does its business on ServiceNow and AWS, our own business. But very often, I would ask our people to get me a report, and if they say, well, we have to make some changes in ServiceNow, so on, my answer usually is, well, use Excel. Why? Because for 17 out of 21 years, I used Excel, right? Or, before that, spreadsheets. And it's only in the, now that, we are getting more used to using ServiceNow dashboard, so on. So Excel is a very deep-rooted habit. And, as we were reading about and discussing internally about Charles Duhigg's model, he actually wrote a bestseller as well, and I thought I'll include that as an example, that our brains form and leverage habits because we are incapable of truly multitasking. Yet, every day we are asked to do multitasking in very short order, every day at work. And what brains do is that they look at a cue, a trigger. Based on that, if they are doing the same thing again and again, it becomes a routine, and it gives a reward. It could be, ending something or a successful meeting or what have you. And very quickly, we develop an understanding, our brains develop an understanding to repeat the same routine, same behavior when given that cue. We don't consciously think about it, but we fall back onto those habits quite a bit at our workplace. And think about it, if your brain is not capable of multitasking, how do we still achieve so much in a given day? It's the power of habits. It's a very successful, evolutionary tactic that human beings employed. But at the same time, anytime there's change, it's our habits also as humans, as individuals, that lead to some resistance. And it's not resistance because we want to resist it. It's because we fall back on our routine. Every time that cue is given, we fall back onto our routines. So in the OCM models, we have started talking about cues. We've started talking about triggers, about, well, if you want a different routine, you have to ask or give a different cue. Because with the different cue, you can expect that people will think consciously, not fall into the older version or older routine or older behavior. And when they think consciously, they're starting to start a new behavior. And with time, if it is reinforced, that new behavior becomes the new routine, new habit, right? And at that point in time, you could say, yeah, that change has been accomplished. Here are some examples that I actually use my own sort of work habit and said when our people have been asking to change my own behavior, and so the old cues are what I was asking them, and the new cues are what they would come and tell me. And I would say, send me the report. Say, no, let's look at the dashboard. And very quickly, in a couple of months, I started just going to the portal myself and started looking at the data. And the meetings change from where is the data, do I trust the data, to here is the data, let's make decisions on this. Right? So this isn't, these examples, I simply use ServiceNow, but this is really true for everything. So what is the message to everybody on that? It's really that when you start with a change program, look at the organizational component of it, which is an OCM methodology, but also look at how your people work and what cues do you send them, or have you been sending them in the last 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. And both must need to be adopted. And the framework itself needs to be adopted, but then some effort must be made to look at what habits we as human beings have and what can be done to change them. At times it could be simple discussions and more conscious, mindful working. At other times we might need behavioral coaches. We might need sessions simply focus on those, and so on. So that really is about habits, and I thought I would include that because we often find this a very interesting topic as we go about doing our engagements. Finally, perpetual adoption. I talked about this in the beginning, that you create, implement rewards and recognition schemes simply because you are constantly adopting. technology, you're changing that technology, or your new functionalities coming and new people bringing, getting brought into the user base, newer reports coming out. So if you're changing every 6 months, 4 months, every 1 year, that program needs to constantly be ready for these new changes. And thus, these are examples of creating a feedback loop, conducting root cause analysis constantly of, hey, what happened last time? How did we not get it? Can we do something better in terms of adoption? Identify stakeholder groups. Who are the high level of resistance? Maybe they have an unmet need here. Maybe they're the ones who are raising their hand saying, we're changing too fast. We can't keep up with it. And and giving them that venue or addressing those concerns, creating a plan to bridge those gaps, right, has to constantly be done in a regular cycle. So that's what I had that I wanted to cover. Finally, metrics. If one wants to measure the metrics for successful adoption, it is really speed. If people take 5 years to adopt to a new system, they've adopted, but at what cost, right? So speed of adoption, utilization, how many people are using the new systems, the new way of working, and proficiency. How good have people become at using them? Is it like second nature, or are they still referring to manuals or such? But these three are the areas that we would recommend that people build metrics. As I said, Alcor has got its own that we bring to the table. But in general, we would say these would be 3 sets of metrics that everybody that is embarking on significant platform changes should measure. And in terms of business value, that comes with obviously purchase, implementation, and then adoption. Really, what you look for is what their performance improvements. And so, if you can set out early on with what improvement do we want to see, what improvements will mean that what can be quantifiable, what's qualitative, but you put specific measures in the beginning of the engagement as part of your OCM objective, and you constantly report on them, that shows value realization constantly to the organization. Adherence to time frames, constant building a model that constantly reports on your ROI, and finally speed of adoption. These become the key metrics for business value realization that organizations can use to showcase that, hey, what we invested in, the thing that we went through so much change and pain for, it was worth it, right? And so typically these are the 4 areas in which we would recommend organizations build their metrics in, and start setting them up early on in their engagements, or as soon as they can in the adoption life cycle. So summarizing, technology adoption, multidimensional problem, needs a holistic approach. We talked about the framework and making sure that it is a life cycle based approach. It's not a one-time activity. And we recommend that people really invest in a structured program to drive it constantly. Each of these 7, 8 components need focus and deliberation. And as technology, Servicenow or others, that's a perpetual adoption process. And typically, the most critical components initially are skills availability, user support, program approach, investments in it. And as you keep growing, it changes, or it may change to more sophisticated reasons. But at least with these, organizations or clients would have made a significant improvement in how much ROI they can get from their investments. Going back to that study that we had, some actually organizations got 200 up to 300% return on what they expected from investments with the proper implementation of an OCM approach and an OCM team. So that's what we had. Jeff, I'll hand it back to you for any questions.
Great. Thanks very much, Amit. That was very, very interesting. So there are a few questions. Just as a reminder, please use the question section to ask a question on today's topic. So let's just jump right into it here, Amit. First question, what are Alcor's key value realization differentiators?
So I would say the biggest one is that we simply based on 500 plus engagements, simply based on the fact that we worked in a highly changing, fast changing, highly complex, dynamic technology workplace. We realized that, one size doesn't fit all. We need to have a holistic, framework to it, a life cycle approach. And I think that's what our key differentiator is, that we built out a program approach that works across all of those areas. There were 8 areas that we highlighted. And I think that's really what differentiates us from, an approach where it's basically said, let's train people and let's communicate.
Okay, good. When should we start OCM activities? During a project or after?
As soon as you start planning the project. This should become a part of the program management approach of any initiative. When you're buying something, when you're putting down the money, at that point in time, you should be very clear on what are the measures of success and how we're going to achieve them. So if you haven't done that, then my advice would be as soon as possible.
Okay, makes sense. Do you find younger generations are more easily adaptable to change because of the nature and speed that technology changes? Are they more used to the rapid evolving of technology?
My personal experience, it's not so. I think it is not age related. It is a frame of mind. Anybody that has worked in Agile and has embraced it, anybody that understands DevOps has embraced it, would be as open to change. It is true that some of us, I'll include myself in that group, we grew up in the older waterfall, slower moving engagements, and where we had a lot of time to think through some of these things. Right, I grew up implementing R3 in SAP, one of the first versions, and we would dedicate days and days to topics like this. In today's fast-moving world, we don't have as much time. But I think what we learned is as applicable, as it would be for someone younger that has only learned the new way of working. So not age-related, I would just say it's really a willingness to invest in the right structure and being open.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yep. All right, last question here. So just a reminder, if anyone has a question for Amit today, please add it to the question section of the dashboard. And one more popped up. So good. So this one, this is kind of vague. So the question is, how do we initiate a conversation about adopting the OCM? So I'm not sure if that means internally prior to the beginning of a project, or if that's more of a question around how do they contact us. But that's the question. How do we initiate a conversation about adopting OCM?
The second one is easy. Second part is easy, right? Contact us through our website or write to anybody you know. About the first one, that's a very interesting question there. How to start it? The best way, the best place to start is to really identify who will this initiative impact, and then building that core team and then asking them, who do you think this will impact? Simply because when we ask that question first time, we may still not know who all it impacts and in what ways. We all have our own perspective on what an initiative will do, who will it impact, and how strongly or how indirectly or directly, right? So if you ask enough people, that's the only way to really realize that what we are envisaging that will happen today may not be what others are envisaging, and may not be what will really happen in 3-4 years time. So so spending some time on it early on, that really with as many people as you need to talk to, having a conversation around that is the best way to start it. And what you would do is, once you build an OCM program in the organization, this becomes second nature, and you develop a change network, you develop personas that you can keep going to again and again for similar initiatives.
Okay. All right, good. And last question. Do you recommend engaging this process as part of defining the scope of the project? Meaning this change management will consume hours on the project, and how is this effort billed into the overall cost of the project?
Absolutely. Again, it should be an open conversation about how would you adopt, how would you adopt, or how would you really use this technology. A lot of times we make assumptions that what a client does is client's business. Not so. End of the day, an engagement team succeeds together and fails together. And to that, at least to that extent, we must start asking questions either in the initial discussion cycle or during the workshops. If we find or if a client finds themselves that, oh my God, we bit off more than what we could chew, we need more help here, right? So that conversation, best time to usually have that conversation is either in the sales cycle or discussion cycle or at the workshops.
Okay, makes sense. All right, one more came in. Is Alcor's value realization roadmap universal for every customer, or should it be customized?
The framework is based on life cycle. So as such, it includes the essential components that must be considered. You can customize the relative importance or the relative amount of time or effort you'd spend on each step based on a client or organization's maturity. Some organizations have very active leaderships. Some others have formal communication departments with extensive communication protocols and stakeholder lists and what have you. So in those, you may spend more time in something else, right? Some other step instead of on communication or engaging the leadership. But you should definitely consider or look at the whole framework, and then look at where, given a certain situation, more effort has to be spent than others.
Right on. Okay. Thank you very much, Amit. Great topic, very informative. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining. The recording of today's webinar will be available on our website, www.alcortech.com. We will also send everyone in attendance today a link through email. So thanks again, and we will see you at the next webinar.
Thank you.